Look at today. 2 weeks ago, we saw Samson's beginnings with an angel of the Lord appearing to his mom and his dad, saying, "You're gonna, even though you're barren, you're gonna have a son, and he's gonna be a Nazarite from birth. So start watching your diet and know that you're gonna raise this child up in the way of the Lord, set apart for God's purposes, as a Nazarite." And then it's like a fast forward from she gives birth to Samson to Judges 14, where Samson goes down to Timnah as an adult. Okay, so that whole intermediate section between childhood and him in his early adulthood is left out. But God just takes it from the get-go of the beginning of chapter 14 to reveal some things about Samson, even though he's got a big plan for him. So look in Judges 14, starting in verse 1. It says, Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines, and he came up and told his father and mother, "I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." But his father and mother said to him, "Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives, among all of our people, that you must go take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes." And his father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines, and at the time the Philistines ruled over Israel. So if you remember, if you weren't here a couple weeks ago, the Philistines are oppressing Israel. They've pretty much got them under control. It's a 40-year period of time, and Samson is on the scene about 20 years of that. But during this time, the Israelites are oppressed by Philistines, and the last thing a mom and dad wants to hear at this point, as an Israelite, much less an Israelite parent of a Nazarite, because he's supposed to be set apart for God's purposes, is the son to come home and say, "I want to marry a Philistine," because they were basically enemies. They were the oppressors of Israel. And so you can imagine when Samson came home and said, "Hey, I found a beautiful wife and she's a Philistine," the fight that ensued from there. And we get a little taste of it, but you know what? In my house, it'll probably look a little bit elevated than just, "Hey, you really should find a wife among the Israelites." That this got kind of crazy. But Samson at the end shouted back, "Get her for me. She's right in my own eyes." And how many of times have we as people said, "I think this is right, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make this happen, regardless of how wrong other people are telling me. I think it's right, and I'm going to just dig in 100%, and I'm going." And I'm not really asking questions. I'm not really asking for advice. I'm not asking for counsel. I'm just doing my own thing. Well, that's where Samson found himself. And it's the first story of this Nazarite set apart for God's purposes that we get in the Bible, which is kind of interesting. But there's an interesting little caveat that we skip over because we read real fast, especially verse 4, that we're so focused on Samson and his disobedience that we miss God's hand in this whole thing. And so look at verse 4 real quick, because this sets the whole backdrop for the rest of Samson's life and every story that we're going to read according to what the Bible's recorded about his life. It says, his father and mother did not know, and we kind of missed it, that this was from the Lord. And for God was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines, and at the time the Philistines ruled over Israel. And so some people would go and say, okay, Samson's disobedience is from the Lord. And we'd have to ask the question, wait, hold on before you jump to that. Would God ever counter his word to accomplish his will? Would God ever say, "This is my word for the Israelites. You shall never intermarry with the Philistines. You should not just worship their gods. You should not bring them into your home and mix with them. You should be a dedicated, set apart people of God and live according to the plan God has for you." That's what God had told him. Would God ever say, "Oh, except for Samson, he should disobey everything I've said about the Israelites"? And the answer is no. But a lot of people look at this story and say, see, right here is an example where God is going against his word, going against what he said to accomplish his purposes. And I would have to say God would never do that. God is never going to counter his word to accomplish his purpose. But if we counter his word, he can still accomplish his purpose. So what we look at Samson's life from here all the way through his lifetime, he's going to make a lot of mistakes. And we've got to look at that and say, you know what, he could have made better choices. But at the end of the day, God is going to use even his poor choices to accomplish God's will, because God is big enough for that. Now, some of us hear that and they go, sweet, that means I can do whatever I want to. And it doesn't matter because God's will is going to be accomplished? No, Samson experienced a lot of consequences. by the choices he made. And the people around him experienced a lot of negative consequences by the choices he made. So he had to walk through his disobedience and reap the consequences of it, and so did people around him. So it's not, I can do whatever I want to, and God's will is going to be accomplished, and it's all going to be good. No, there's still going to be consequences, but even in our disobedience and the consequences, God is so much bigger than that. And he's still going to accomplish his perfect will. And so God, despite Samson, is going to use this as an opportunity to begin the deliverance. That's what we looked at. Samson's role was to begin the deliverance of Israel from the Philistines. So look at verse 5. Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came out towards them roaring, and the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces, so as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father and mother what he had done. And so here's the first time that we see the Spirit of the Lord encountering and coming upon Samson to accomplish something that there's no way he could have done on his own. And some people go, oh, it was a young lion. Well, even though that's what our English says, it was a lion that had just gotten kicked out of his tribe. Actually, it's called pride, but I didn't know that. So lions run in prides. He had just gotten kicked out of that. That's what this sub-adult, young adult means, and he's trying to establish territory. And so this lion said, this vineyard's my territory, and he's aggressive, and he's establishing dominance over this. And so Samson's walking through the vineyard, the lion goes, this is my territory, and the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon Samson, and he just rips it apart. And Samson had to look at that and go, what just happened to me? How did I get that kind of power to accomplish that kind of feat because it was like a little kid goat in my hands? So that's the first time Samson experiences the Spirit of God and his power that God has got ordained for him to accomplish his purposes. And he'll build on that through his experience with Samson. Verse 7, they went down to talk with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes. After some days he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion and honey. He scraped it out in his hands and went on eating it as he went. And he came to his father and mother and gave them some to them, and they ate, but did not tell them that he had scraped the honey from the carcass of the lion. And so this is the second time Samson goes to visit his newlywed, engaged wife that's right in his eyes. And as he returns through the vineyard, he notices the lion that he tore apart laying in the vineyard, and it's full of honey, and there's a bee swarm going on. And Samson just lackadaisically just walks in, he steals the honey, he gives them to his mom and his dad, and it says he didn't tell him. Why didn't he tell him that? Well, because as a Nazarite set apart for God's purposes, his mom had to follow a certain diet, he had to follow a certain diet, and it's like, are you going to the point that you can't eat honey as a Nazarite? Nope. But you can't touch dead things. And Samson totally blew off that requirement, and he went in and he dug out in the carcass of this lion the honey, and he starts eating it, and we're like, that's kind of gnarly. And then he feeds it to his mom and dad, but he doesn't tell them where it came from, because they would immediately go, Samson, you're not supposed to touch dead things. You're set apart for God's purposes. Why would you do such a thing? But Samson's like, it's honey. It's all good. And it tastes good, right? No harm, no foul. But you begin to see that he's not really taking this Nazarite vow very seriously. The fact that he killed the lion in the first place and left it for dead is the first sign. Now he's going back and returning to it. And we're going to see he continues to use this experience through the course of his wedding. So in verse 10 it says, his father went down to the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, because that's what young men do. And as soon as the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said to him, now let me now put a riddle to you. If you can tell me what it is within 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot tell me what it is, then you shall give me the 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. And they said to him, put your riddle, that we may hear it. And he said to them, out of the eater came something to eat, out of the strong came something sweet. And in 3 days they could not solve the riddle. On the fourth day they said to Samson's wife, entice your husband to tell us what the riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to impoverish us? So we start to see this whole progression of Samson's craziness start to affect those people around him. And so he eats out of the honey of the lion. He continues to go to Timnah. And as he gets there, they start throwing this wedding feast. Now, we just read the wedding feast lasts for 7 days. The problem is Samson shows up a loner. He's got nobody to be a part of his bridal party, all right? So imagine the groom standing at the thing, and the wife's got 10 bridal attendants, and the dude's standing there by himself like, I don't have any friends. I'm here by myself. And so the people of Philistine, the people of Timnah say, hey, we got you covered. We're going to give you 30 attendants. We're going to have 30 buds hang out with you. Now, an interesting twist to this is, it says when they saw him, there's a fear element in that. And so they're almost kind of like saying, we're going to give you 30 dudes to hang out with you. But what they're doing is really putting 30 dudes around him that are going to like protect the people of Timnah from him, because they're not really sure about Samson, and they're kind of weary of him or leery of him, and they're kind of afraid of him. So it's kind of a dual role. We're going to give you 30 buds because you don't have anybody with you, but they're really going to watch out for us. And so Samson's going to have some fun with this. He's got 30 guys, and he's like, hey, I'm going to put a riddle to you that only Samson knows the answer to, and he's the only one that knows the experience, because remember, his mom and dad weren't even at that part of that. So Samson's like, I got a no-brainer here, and I'm going to totally get 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes from these guys, because there's no way they'll ever figure out this riddle, because it's about the lion and the honey coming out of it. Out of the eater, the lion, came something to eat, sweet. Out of the strong came something sweet. So what comes out of a lion? Honey. Nobody's going to figure that out. Samson's like, this is a slam dunk. I'm going to get so rich after this. And after 3 days, it seems like it's going really well. But on the 4th day, the wedding attendant guys are like, knowing that there's no way they're going to solve this riddle, and they're like, we're not going to go in debt because this guy's got a riddle that we can't solve. We're going to go after his wife. And so they basically are really good friends to the wife, right? Saying, hey, tell us this riddle, or we're going to kill you and burn your house down and kill your dad. Thanks, people of Timnah. Who's looking out for who? But what started this whole sequence of events? Samson just going, hey, I think I'll eat honey out of a lion and then put a riddle to these guys and scam them out of 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes, because there's no way they're ever going to solve this riddle. So Samson's bringing now trouble not just to himself, but his new bride and their family. So, verse 16. Samson's wife wept over him and said, you only hate me, you do not love me, you have put a riddle to my people, and you have not told me what it is. And he said to her, behold, I have not even told my mother and father. Shall I tell you? Now, marital counseling 101. Who's she putting in front of Samson? Her people, right? Who's Samson putting in front of her? Mom and dad. On both counts, right? No, when women and men come together as husband and wife, it's like number one and number one, second to only number one. But they're totally starting this whole marriage relationship off the wrong hand. Sure, she's all concerned about her parents, or her people, and he's all concerned about his parents, and it's off to a really bad start. So she wept before him in verse 17 for 7 days as their feast lasted. Now, what's supposed to be going on during the 7 days of this wedding celebration? Having a good time. She's crying in the corner all the time because she knows after 3 days that her mom and dad, her house is going to get destroyed unless she comes through with this riddle. So what's supposed to be a wedding celebration is actually just turmoil and chaos and grief. So in 7 days the feast lasted. On the 7th day he told her because she pressed him hard. Now that's just that constant dripping, right? That you got to tell me, you got to tell me, you got to tell me. And eventually wore him out. And then he told her the riddle. She told the riddle to her people. And then verse 18, the men of the city said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Now, he knew nobody else knew this except to the wife that he told. And so he says to them, something we should never say out loud as a guy, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. All right, now this is just like off the cuff, man, because you should never call a wife a heifer in the first place. But what's he actually saying? Heifers were not used for plowing fields. Heifers were used for dairy and for making more heifers. But you would never put a heifer under a plow. And so he's like, you took my wife and you used her in a way that she never should have been used. So at least he's sticking up for her. He just is a really bad analogy. And said, if you hadn't have plowed my field with a heifer, you never would have found out my riddle, which is true. But the truth of the matter is, if he had never been greedy or just spontaneously crazy and put this riddle to the people, they would have never had to plow his heifer. They would have never had to go there. But he brought trouble upon her and subsequent trouble upon her family because he's just running roughshod. He's just spontaneously doing what he wants to do. And you're like, yeah, but God's going to use it. Yeah, but look what all the chaos is being caused by him just doing his own thing. So, verse 19. Here comes God. The Spirit of the Lord rushes upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon and struck down 30 men of the town and took their spoil and gave the garments to those who had told the riddle. In hot anger, he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. What just happened? He is crazy mad because they plowed his heifer, they got the riddle, and so the Spirit of God empowers him, which we can't even fathom, to help him go get his debt paid by destroying 30 guys in Ashkelon, getting their changes of clothes, getting their linen, bringing it back to the 30 men, and then what's Samson do? He rushes home mad as a hornet. And in doing that, in his anger, does not consummate his marriage on the seventh day, which is what marriage is like, not all about, but is so important on the first time they're together. And so he totally blows off the whole consummation of the marriage. And the dad looks around and goes, where'd he go? And so the dad's first response is, I just gave my daughter away. The groom didn't consummate the marriage. I'm going to give her to the next in line, who is who? The best man. And we get left scratching our heads going, what just happened here? But what leads us scratching our heads even more is God's Spirit rushing upon Samson to accomplish the defeat of 30 guys in Ashkelon so that he can release his pay back to the wedding party. Why would God do that? Because God's goal for Samson is to begin the deliverance of Israel from the Philistines. And he's going to use Samson to accomplish the beginning of that, even in the chaos that Samson has caused. I wish I had a better explanation for that. But in Samson's spontaneity, in his pride, in his thinking he's going to get one up on the wedding party, as he's doing his own thing, God continues to give him the power to spare him and to use him to begin the deliverance of the people of Israel. Many of us can think of a Samson-type character in our lives. And we love that about them. And we also can't stand that sometimes about them. But then put yourself in the situation where, think about when something is right in your own eyes and you're just bent on going that direction, that really is a lot like Samson's personality. And we all fall into that sometimes. It's like, I don't want to hear it. I'm just doing it. And God's tapping us on the shoulder going, you know what? We could do this a best different way. But a lot of the times he guides us through that, even in our own doing, to accomplish his purposes. But he could have done it a lot better with a lot less consequences associated to it. And so as Samson's doing his own thing, God's using it. And God begins to use it. But I don't want you to take this story out of context, because if you don't come back next week or the next week, you're going to lose a lot of what God's actually doing in and through Samson. And a lot of what Samson's doing in and through himself, to himself, and those around him. And so, even though God used it, that's just a picture of who God is. But Samson is a warning sign kind of the exact opposite of what Dawn and her prayer posse experienced as they walked out God's will. Samson's not walking out God's will because he's doing it God's way. He's walking out God's will because God's big enough to make it his will. And we got to be leery of just blowing off God's word or his direction or that still small voice or that quiet whisper and saying, well, it's all going to work out in the end anyway. No, there's a lot of consequences associated with this. But if God can and God does use a Samson-type personality who's not seeking, who's doing his own thing, and is still getting the Spirit of God empowered in his life, which is all true, how much more can God use us if we're humbly surrendered to him? If we're seeking his will, if we're seeking his face, if we're not running off and doing our own thing, and if we're saying, God, direct my steps on my path, and let my meditation be pleasing to you, and let my heart be in line with your word, how much more so can he use that kind of heart? If he can use a Samson, how much better can he use a humble heart, a heart that's seeking after his will? And so as I was reflecting on this week, I thought about this book that I read years and years ago called Walking in the Will of God. And so last night I got it out and I just thumbed through all the different aspects of walking through the will of God. And that if we're searching for God's will, have you ever stressed over God's will because you just don't want to miss God's will? Like you're so messed up that you're afraid you're going to miss God's will that you're either paralyzed by fear or you're just incapacitated to making decisions. You ever been there? Or is that just me? Walking in the will of God helped me discern, as does Samson's story, that if we're searching after God's will, he is not going to let us miss his will. Because if he can use Samson to accomplish his will, who's certainly not searching after God's will, but still being empowered by God's Spirit to accomplish his will, how much more so can he do it in a humble heart that's surrendered to him? And so it just kind of takes a refreshing approach of you're not going to miss God's will if you're searching after God's will. And even, caveat, if you do miss God's will, he's still going to work it out, because you're searching after it. And I would up the ante a little bit and say, even if you're not, he still is. It's just going to look different. But God definitely wants us down here saying, I want your humble, broken, surrendered heart searching after my will, and I guarantee I'm going to reveal to you the steps you need to take as you walk it out. So just relax. And say, man, at least I'm not like Samson. Or we get to the point of going, dang, I'm a lot like Samson. But I want to get more like this surrendered will of God kind of guy or gal and walk it out according to his plan. So the first step is relax and just say, if you're searching after God's will, you will find God's will. And go back to Romans 12 and just chill on that verse, Romans 12, 1 and 2. And find out, what am I supposed to separate myself from as this Nazarite so that I can understand and test and approve what God's perfect and pleasing will is. Now, this applies on an individual basis. It also applies on a corporate basis. And so as we as a church family are seeking after God's will, the vision team met last week. Elders are meeting. We're going to get back together as a vision team. And I was talking to Scott this morning. I was just like, it's not like we're just saying, God, this is how we're going to do it, and this is how it's going to be. It's like, God, what do you want? And we're really hoping that it's a blank piece of paper, what God wants. And if it's not, he'll show us, like, dude, you're hanging on to this. Me and George are talking about the empty drawer. Empty your drawer out. And we open the drawer back up and there's still something in there way back in the deep corner. Or in my case, there's probably like a hidden compartment somewhere with something in it. That we got to just open the drawer and say, God, clean out that drawer because we want what you want. And if that's our heart and that's our desire as individuals, as a church family, God goes, could you just chill and know that I'm going to get my perfect will accomplished? And even if it's not my perfect will because you missed it, it's still my pleasing will. And even if you missed my perfect and my pleasing will, it's still going to be my good will. And I'll get you to the perfect. But we all don't want to miss the perfect, so we don't do anything. Or we're afraid of what the perfect might look like. And the perfect might look like just as simply as humbling your heart and God saying, go pray with that person. Like you put on Dawn's heart. And we're like, oh, but that's not this huge. There's not 1,000 people involved. It's my perfect will right now. Take that baby step of my perfect will, and my perfect will continue to manifest itself in your life as you walk in the will of God. This is not hey, I'm going to start walking, and 10 years from now I'm going to get to God's perfect will. It's a perfect will today, perfect will tomorrow, perfect will the next day. As I journey with God. That's why it's like walking with the will of God. It's a daily step. And sometimes I'm going to get off his will. But if I go back and say, God, where did I miss your will? He's going to say, take a left step to the left. Do the hokey pokey. He's going to have a little fun with it. We just need to chill out and not put so much pressure on ourselves and put pressure on our leadership or put pressure on our church or individual ministries. You guys got to get God's will. Let's just come together and say, as a body, God, we want to seek your will. And we don't want to miss your will because yours is perfect. Thought about our children's, like, okay, so beginning of the year, right? Ministry focus. We don't want to miss God's will. Children's ministry, small groups, facilities, what God's got in store for us. And I look and we go, we're halfway through the year and we haven't done anything significant in any one of these things. And God's like, could you chill out? Are you asking? Do you see development? Do you see me shifting things? Yeah, but we haven't made decisions yet. Relax. Children's ministry. I thought last week, the whole Belize mission trip is a fruit and a result of children's ministry. If you miss that, connect that. If you're going, man, I don't see anything happening in our children's ministry, look up here and go get the video and see 12 kids sprawled across the front. Those are the product of your children's ministry. It just took years and years for it to develop. And now we look and go, yeah, but what's he doing now? They've grown up and went off the mission trip. And now they're instructing us. And they're encouraging us. And they're speaking truth into us. I think that's a good thing. Small groups. Small groups ain't what it's supposed to be. You're right. But is our heart for God to restore small groups back to being the foundation of Church of the Beach? Absolutely. What does that look like for you? What's that look like for me? We got to ask those questions. And we got to be obedient to it as God discusses his perfect will. And then facilities, man, we've been talking about facilities for 12 years. It's like blah, 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 blah. But now it's different. Because we're not saying, God, give us the facilities for Sunday morning. We're like, we just need facilities to encourage and to build and to connect and to get relationships continued through the week. What does that look like? It doesn't look like some big old open space that's going to sit empty 90% of the time. It's going to be a smaller gathering place where people can just come and hang out and build relationships and have Bible studies and have childcare and chill and relax and walk in the will of God. That's been on the radar, but it really hasn't really seeped into our hearts yet. So we're like, okay, God, what does that look like? At the end of the day, though, if our church family has this vision for what God wants to accomplish, it can't happen unless the individuals of our church family are walking in the will of God and relaxing and seeking his face and doing what he wants us to do. Because this is not going to come from the leadership going, this is what we're going to go do. It's going to be birthed within the individuals going, this is what I feel led to be a part of. And just remember, if he's doing it through Samson, who's running crazy, how much better does he want to do it through us in our messed up, broken way, going, God, just do it your way and have your will with us. So let me just encourage you guys to relax with me, because I'm like the chief not relaxer, which is the chief sinner. And just say, God, you reveal yourself. Let us keep in step with your spirit. And let's just say, we are here for another year, and embrace it and say, what do you want us to accomplish at Ocean Breeze for your perfect will as we continue building relationships here, because he's got us here for a reason. So let's